In the middle of the night, a college student vanished from her own home without a single trace. Police moved quickly, launching a search almost immediately. Before long, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Piece by piece, investigators uncovered a truth that would stun the entire nation. Eve Carson was born on November 19, 1985, in Athens, Georgia. From an early age, she stood out for her drive and laser-sharp focus. In high school, she served as vice president of the student council, volunteered at a nursing home and a shelter for abused teens, worked as a congressional page, and assisted in a stem cell research lab, all while keeping up with her classes. After graduating with honors, she enrolled at the University of North Carolina, pursuing a double major in political science and biology. Her exceptional academic record earned her a prestigious, highly competitive scholarship. On campus, she quickly became a leader, stepping into major roles across multiple student organizations. But Eve's impact reached far beyond the university. She continued her community service, taught science at a local elementary school, and devoted time to volunteer efforts overseas. She spent a summer in Ecuador assisting doctors, completed a semester of study in Cuba, and joined a research team in Egypt. There was no question, she was one of the most accomplished students at UNCC. Eve had ambitious plans for her future, and she was already well on her way. Even before graduating, she had secured a job offer from a major company, set to begin her career after earning her degree. By February, Eve was 22 years old and in her senior year of college. She was living off campus with a close-knit group of friends. On the night of March 5th, around 1:30 a.m., her roommates left for a party. They invited Eve to join them, but she chose to stay home and get ready for her upcoming classes. They headed out without her and didn't return until about 4:30 that morning. The moment her friends walked back into the house, they sensed something was wrong. The front door was standing wide open. The lights were still on, but Eve was gone. Her car was gone, too. None of it made sense. Why would she leave in the middle of the night? And why would she leave the house unlocked? They called her phone over and over, but she never answered. Still, they tried to convince themselves that maybe something unexpected had come up, that she had simply stepped out and would be back any minute. They waited, expecting to hear her walk through the door. But when the next day came and there was still no sign of Eve, one of her friends finally made the call to police. When investigators heard the details, they shared something chilling. Earlier that same morning, officers had discovered the body of a young woman, but at the time, her identity was unknown. They showed a photograph to one of Eve's friends. The reaction was immediate. It was Eve. Just hours after she was last seen, around 5 a.m., police had received a 911 call from a woman who lived about a mile from Eve's house. She had been jolted awake by the sound of gunshots, followed by a scream. Terrified, she called authorities right away. When officers arrived on scene, they found the body of a young woman lying on the ground. She had no ID, no phone, nothing to identify her, only the devastating evidence that she had been shot multiple times. Once her friend confirmed the victim was Eve, detectives interviewed her roommates and began assembling a timeline. At 1:30 a.m., she was home studying. By 5 a.m., her body was found a mile away. The urgent questions became, how did she get there? And who was responsible? Because her car was missing, investigators initially suspected robbery. That theory gained traction when a search of her room revealed her wallet and credit cards were also gone, and none of those items were recovered near her body. The medical examiner later confirmed there were no signs of sexual assault, eliminating that as a possible motive. When investigators pulled Eve's phone records, they discovered the last signal had pinged off a tower near a highway just outside town. But the phone itself was never recovered. Detectives believed the killer had likely tossed it into the woods, making it nearly impossible to trace. Then came the first major lead. A vehicle matching the description of Eve's car was found abandoned just a few miles from her home. Authorities immediately had it towed and sent to the crime lab for fingerprinting and DNA analysis. At the same time, detectives uncovered another critical piece of evidence. Forensic analysts examined Eve's computer, the one she used for school, and determined it had been active until about 3:30 a.m. That meant she had still been at home for at least 2 hours after her roommates left for the party. Sometime after that, she ended up a mile away, where her body was discovered. By then, news of Eve's murder had spread throughout the city, sending shockwaves across her college campus. Almost everyone knew her. She had held leadership roles in numerous student organizations, and her sudden death left the community shattered. Grief quickly gave way to fear. Students and residents alike began to worry about their own safety, and the absence of solid leads from police only deepened the anxiety. Tips flooded in. Students reported anything that seemed remotely suspicious, desperate to help move the investigation forward. But despite the overwhelming volume of information, none of it brought detectives any closer to the truth. Then, finally, came a critical breakthrough. Because Eve's credit cards were missing, detectives pulled her transaction history, and what they uncovered was alarming. Just 18 minutes after she last used her computer, someone withdrew $700 from her account in 2 separate transactions. Attempts to withdraw more cash were denied due to the daily limit. The ATM used for those withdrawals was located near a shopping center on the far side of town. Detectives immediately requested the surveillance footage, and it delivered a critical lead. The video showed a man sitting inside Eve's car, using her card at the ATM. In the back seat, there appeared to be another figure. Investigators feared it might have been Eve herself, but the image quality was too poor to say for sure. Forensic specialists attempted to enhance the footage, but their efforts produced no clear results. As the investigation continued, police discovered that the suspect had tried to use Eve's card at several other ATMs across the city. Unfortunately, none of those machines had surveillance cameras. The activity continued until March 7th, when investigators received another alert about an attempted withdrawal. Around 12:30 a.m., someone tried to use Eve's card at an ATM inside a 24-hour convenience store. The transaction was declined, but officers quickly responded to the location in a neighboring town. Unlike the previous ATMs, this store was equipped with a working security camera. When detectives reviewed the footage, they saw someone using Eve's card, but in a shocking twist, it was not the same man captured in the earlier ATM video. Now investigators were faced with 2 possibilities. Either more than one person was involved in Eve's murder, or the killer had handed off her card to an accomplice. They worked to identify the second suspect, but once again, the footage was too grainy to make a positive identification. With the investigation stalling, police turned to the public for help. They released both sets of surveillance images to the media, hoping someone would recognize the individuals. Given the intense attention the case had already drawn, the police department was soon flooded with tips. But despite the wave of incoming calls, none of the leads brought detectives any closer to identifying Eve's killer. Then everything changed. On March 12th, an anonymous caller came forward with a crucial tip, claiming to recognize the man in the convenience store surveillance video. The caller identified him as Deario Atwater. Detectives immediately began digging into Atwater's background, and what they uncovered was deeply troubling. At just 21 years old, he already had an extensive criminal record, including multiple arrests for robbery, assault, drug offenses, and other crimes. Although he had served time in prison, he had also been released early on several occasions. Even more disturbing, investigators learned that just 2 days after Eve's murder, Deario had been scheduled to appear in court for carrying a handgun while on probation. Detectives pulled his old mugshots and compared them to the convenience store footage. The resemblance was unmistakable. They were confident they had identified their suspect. Strengthening their case, they discovered that Deario lived only a short distance from the store. Detectives moved quickly, heading to his residence. During questioning, Deario denied any involvement in Eve's death, but the surveillance footage gave authorities enough probable cause to arrest him. As the investigation deepened, detectives uncovered another link. Deario had been in frequent contact with a 17-year-old named Levette, who, despite his age, already had a criminal record of his own. When investigators reviewed Lawrence's mugshot, they immediately recognized him as the individual driving Eve's car in the first ATM video. Unlike Deario, Lawrence did not come quietly. He barricaded himself inside his home, forcing law enforcement to deploy a SWAT team. After he was finally taken into custody, he also denied any involvement. Both suspects were charged and held in jail pending trial. With neither man cooperating, investigators focused on strengthening their case through other evidence. Cell phone data soon revealed something critical. On the night of Eve's murder, both suspects' phones had pinged off a tower near her neighborhood, even though they lived in a different city. Detectives concluded that Deario and Lawrence had likely selected Eve at random, searching for someone to rob and noticing that she was home alone late at night. Based on the ATM transactions, investigators determined that Eve had been forced to drive her captors to multiple locations, where she was made to withdraw money from her account. After reaching the $700 daily withdrawal limit, they drove her to a wooded area on the edge of town, where they ultimately murdered her. Given the brutality of the crime, prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty against Deario. Lawrence's case, however, was more complicated. Because he was still a minor, the harshest sentence he could face was life in prison. Prosecutors understood that even with the evidence, a conviction was not guaranteed. So they made a strategic decision, offering Deario a plea deal. If he pleaded guilty, the death penalty would be taken off the table. He accepted. In doing so, he confessed to the chilling details of that night. According to Deario, he and Lawrence had set out with a simple plan: to commit a robbery and make quick cash. Lawrence had called him with the idea of targeting someone near the university campus. As they drove through a neighborhood, they spotted Eve through a window inside her home and decided she would be their victim. Armed with guns, they broke in, forced her into her own car, and began driving from ATM to ATM, attempting to drain her bank account. Throughout the terrifying ordeal, Eve pleaded with them to let her go. She promised she wouldn't report them. She begged to be allowed to return home. But the two had already made their decision. Deario admitted they chose to kill her because she had seen their faces, even though they had made no effort to disguise themselves. Eventually, they drove her to a deserted street and shot her multiple times using 2 different firearms. He then revealed something especially heartbreaking. Just moments before they pulled the trigger, Eve asked them to pray with her. They showed no mercy. Without hesitation, they executed her. In April 2010, 2 years after the murder, Deario was found guilty. Under the terms of his plea agreement, he was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 30 years, spared from the death penalty he had once faced. After the verdict was read, Deario turned to Eve's parents, apologized for his actions, and admitted he deserved the punishment handed down to him. Lawrence, however, refused to plead guilty, and his trial began in December 2011. Despite his attorney's attempts to argue his innocence, Deario's detailed confession, combined with the overwhelming physical and digital evidence, led the jury to find Lawrence guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. But the case did not end there. In 2013, the State Court of Appeals overturned his sentence, citing a separate ruling that determined life without parole for juvenile offenders was unconstitutional and excessively harsh. As a result, Lawrence was granted a new sentencing hearing. This time, he spoke more openly in court, telling the judge that everyone makes mistakes and insisting he was not the monster the public believed him to be. Yet his words rang hollow. He expressed no genuine remorse. Ultimately, the judge once again sentenced him to life in prison. Investigators had also considered Lawrence a suspect in another disturbingly similar case. In January 2008, just months before Eve's murder, a 29-year-old student was killed during a home invasion. After that crime, money was withdrawn from the victim's account at several ATMs across the city. However, authorities were never able to gather enough evidence to directly link Lawrence to that killing, and the charges were eventually dropped. Eve's murder not only captured national attention, it also prompted real change. In February, North Carolina lawmakers passed new legislation imposing tougher penalties and stricter enforcement measures for gang-related crimes. The law officially took effect on December 1st and applies to offenses committed from that date forward. It was legislation born directly out of the tragedy that took Eve's life. At her university, a scholarship was established in her name, and a memorial garden was created on campus to honor her memory. In February 2009, one of Eve's close friends became a finalist on American Idol. While on stage, he shared that Eve's death had inspired him to take a chance and audition. He said that without her influence, he never would have found the courage or determination to pursue his dream. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We bring you new true crime stories every night. Until next time, stay alert and stay vigilant.